Ja, guten Abend hier im Schmälerhaus und ich begrüße alle ganz herzlich, die, weil trotz dieses schrecklichen Regens hierher gekommen sind, um einen Vortrag zu hören von meiner wirklich sehr geschätzten Kollegin Hiuwai Chu aus dem MACBA in Barcelona. Hello, Hiuwai. Thank you for coming here. I'm really glad that we can have that talk here with you and share your experience on the show of Akram Zaatari Against Photography. Ich darf vielleicht ganz kurz über Hiuwai Chu sagen. Sie ist schon seit einiger Zeit am MACBA. Sie ist in Barcelona Kuratorin. Sie ist aus New York, war dort auch in einer einem Fotoverlag, Agentur tätig und ist dann jedenfalls schon so lange in Barcelona, dass sie die Vorbereitung zu der Ausstellung mit Akram Zaatari und der Arab Image Foundation von Beginn an erlebt hat, mitentwickelt hat, mit dem damaligen Direktor Bartomeu Mari, der inzwischen in Seoul am Museum ist, weswegen diese Ausstellung nach Düsseldorf dann eben auch noch nach Korea gebracht werden wird. Der Talk wird auf Englisch sein und insofern setze ich auch auf Englisch fort. Hiuwai Chu, the artist as collector. We heard yesterday in the talk with Akram in K21, we heard a lot about the archive and the different artistic practices. And so I'm very happy that you will now tell us a little bit more on this specific artistic practice of the collecting. Thank you very much for being here.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Doris, for the nice introduction. And it's a true pleasure to be here and to see the exhibition so beautifully installed in K21. And thank you all for coming and braving the rain to be here tonight. As Doris said, I've been working on this project with Bartomeu Mari, who's the co-curator, and now the director at MMCA in Seoul, Korea, where the exhibition will be traveling to later. Since we initiated the project in 2014, or perhaps earlier, I've had the privilege to have engaged with Akram in conversations about his work, his thoughts about photography, collecting, and the various debates around the Arab Image Foundation and the ones that their practices have generated during its evolution. For those who are not familiar, the Arab Image Foundation is an archive based in Beirut, which houses photographic collections from North Africa, the Middle East, and the Arab diaspora. That dates from the late 19th century to the present. It was founded in 1997 by Akram Zaatari, Fouad Al-Khouri, and Samam Ghodad to collect and preserve photography from the region made by its residents, both professional and amateur. Since then, thanks to the impetus of its members, composed mainly of artists, it has grown to become one of the most important holdings of photographic material in the Arab region, housing over 600,000 images. However, as the foundation evolved, it became quickly clear that it was not merely a repository of images, but an important platform for artistic practice that encouraged an expanded notion of photographic inquiry. The foundation became part of an important movement that propelled the archival document into the realm of contemporary art. Intrigued by the dual status of the organization as archive and as artistic practice, our initial and naive idea, I will admit, was to do a project about the Arab Image Foundation. However, after we researched and discussed with various people involved, we realized that this was kind of an impossibility and that we really needed a critical subjectivity that we then found in the voice and practice of Akram, who we've had engaged in many conversations previously. And the fact that his own extensive work around photography parallels that of the foundation and that they're both based on collecting practices was ideal for us. As such, the exhibition is not about the Arab Image Foundation, but uses it as a stepping stone to reflect on photography, its role in society, in creating identity and collective memory, and to reflect on the multiple statuses of an image. Sorry, I have my notes here because I prepared a bit last minute and I don't want to veer off track. Akram shies away from using the term archive to describe the Arab Image Foundation. For him, keeping archives implies an act of speculation, whereas collecting implies an interest to study something. And these are just definitions I found on the Webster Dictionary online. He likens the foundation as an engine for collecting, and if the term archive is to be used, it's to be looked at as an archive of collecting practices, which is, in fact, the component that gives it a contemporary twist. Otherwise, it is only housing a container for relics. I would like to read a quote from Akram in his interview with Chad Elias that will be published in the upcoming catalog soon about the foundation. In 2005, I was able to convince the board to recognize collecting as an art practice. It was an important achievement to me because it meant recognizing the diversity of the collection, not only in terms of its geographic origin and modes of production, but also its modes of acquisition. As I see it, the provenance of a collection is not limited to the city or studio it came from, but also to the practice that brought it to the Arab Image Foundation, especially if it involved an artist's research and subjectivity. This means that it is not only the acquired items that are significant, but the acts that led to the acquisition, which are equally relevant. The exchanges, the transactions, conversations, etc. I think there's a general lack of distinction between the two terms, archive and collection, I myself being guilty of using the terms interchangeably. I'm not an expert, but here are a few references which I found online. Historically, the collection is more about process and activity, while the archive is a holding place for things that are gathered together or collected. An archive designates a territory and not a particular narrative. An archive tends to elevate the status of material from obscurity to an implied preservation and the possibility of presentation. It converts a thing into a document. Archives can bring together seemingly random objects and give them collective purpose. Therefore, without the purposeful drive of the collector, we would have no archives. And sorry, I'm quoting Akram again. Although I don't know where I got this reference, sorry. I had imagined that AIF's engagement in the art world would be to support artists' work that involves studying, recontextualizing, narrating, or opening up new ways of looking at the photographic document and in encouraging artists' collecting practices. The collecting and the archiving of objects, whether real or fictional, has emerged as a vital creative practice. I won't go into discussions about the works of other artists here, because there are too many, but we'll focus specifically on Akram's collecting practices and his documentary inquiry that has become a backbone for most of his works, and how these documents manifest themselves in different ways. Contrary to what we tend to associate with collecting in Akram's case is not about ownership or possession. It is about a conscious study. With the reproduction mechanisms that we have today, there is no need to own an item in order to study it. Collections are seen as sites for critical engagement in writing stories. As a teenager growing up during the Lebanese Civil War, which was between 1975 and 1990, he was confined to the safety of his family's home in Saida in South Lebanon. And the lack of coverage in the news and to simply pass time, Akram collected data from his immediate environment through photographs, diary entries, and sound recordings, which would eventually make their way into his works. And as co-founder of the Arab Image Foundation, Akram actively worked to collect a vast amount of photographs made in the Arab world. This fieldwork invariably created personal exchanges and transactions that would be documented and also collected and also used in his works. Looking through the photographs from the acquired collections became like a writing project, a rewriting of history through the personal micro-histories that have been left out of the greater discourse. I would like to rewind and talk about some of Akram's earlier works, which may help us to understand the motivations for the works that are currently on display at K21 in the exhibition Against Photography. And looking at the continuous value given to the collected document and the different ways they are used in his work. So structured kind of semi-chronologically with some tangential references. This is by no means an exhaustive review of Akram's artistic practice because it's too vast to cover here in a short talk. The first work I would like to reference is an early film entitled All Is Well on the Border from 1997. And here are some film stills. It's a film about representations of the Israeli-occupied Lebanon based on a first-hand collection of testimonies and documents of displaced inhabitants living in the suburbs of Beirut. They were former resistance fighters who were imprisoned in Israel or occupied South Lebanon. Using a documentary style of filming, the narrative about resistance and life in prison are read by actors, blurring the boundaries of fiction and reality. Along with archival media footage, the film also mixes new takes in a school with children of displaced inhabitants speaking about their native villages with idealized patriotic depictions. So kind of real depictions of unreal portrayals of places. The film speaks about how reality can be manipulated while also exposing the documentary genre itself through reflections and shots of the video camera. Through the research for the film, Akram, of course, met many people, and one of them was the mother of a prisoner named Nabih Awada, nicknamed Neruda, after the Chilean poet. Neruda wrote over 100 letters to his mother and family while he was in prison from the age of 16 to 26 between the years 1988 to 98. The contents of one of the letters were used as one of the testimonies for the film. And here we see what is part of a photographic series that was developed based on these letters. As part of the series, as you can see here, Akram digitally erased the writing in 3 of the letters, leaving only Neruda's hand-drawn colored flowers. For Akram, the content of the writing was irrelevant, as the letters were generally upbeat and reassuring his mother that he was well in spite of being in prison. So for him, the flower was enough to relay the poetics of hope during such hard conditions in prison. And here I want to digress a little bit about the gesture of erasure in Akram's work, the strategy of taking away to draw our attention to other layers of information that may go undervalued. And here I will refer to some of the works that we see in the exhibition. This is one of the works that you will see upon entering the show. I don't have the before image, but what we see here is people playing in a schoolyard. Seemingly a normal snapshot. If you take a second look, you will notice that the people running seem to be somehow floating in the air without their shadows to anchor them to the floor. Here, what Akram eliminated are the shadows of all other subjects besides that of the photographer. This is in reference to photography and its entry for domestic use, and how often this accident, if you will, would happen quite often. The photographer's shadow appearing in the photographs and merging with his subjects. There's a larger series in the exhibition only with fragments of these different shots of the photographer's shadow, which is comprised of photographs from various collections around the Arab world. And this series is a series entitled Against Photography. If you haven't seen the exhibition, it's an installation of 48 prints with 12 aluminum plates. And at first hand, you look at these prints and you think, what do they have to do with photography? What I'm showing here is what the work is based on. The work is based on 6 damaged negatives from 3 different collections from the Arab Image Foundation. And this is one example. This is the negative, which is a portrait of, siblings, it seems. And you see here the negative has suffered damage due to environmental conditions or simply the passing of time. And what was done here is that a camera was used that documents the relief and not the flat image. And so the results are portraits of the erosion of time, which has another story to tell, which is independent of the image. And this archaeological gesture which very much is a framework for a lot of Akram's work, is very much highlighted in this series. This image is not in the exhibition, and it's an image that Akram sent to me 2 days ago when I mentioned that I wanted to talk about this gesture of erasure in his work. It's an image of a group of men who recently dug up a sarcophagus in Egypt in the late 19th century. And this glowing object is what Akram took away. And somehow taking away, the image is almost shouting that something is missing here. So again, this gesture of taking away brings more attention to certain details that otherwise may go overlooked. Okay. Moving along, another film I want to talk about from 2003, entitled This Day, is a complex, multi-layered 86-minute film, which is an extended contemplation of the use of images, looking at the conditions in which they are made and the implications of their circulation. Crossing time and geographies, it puts into dialogue a range of collected documents with newly shot footage as well. The starting point of the film is Akram flipping through a book by Jabral Sulaiman Jabbour, who was a professor of Arabic literature at the American University of Beirut, who researched the Bedouins in the Syrian desert in the 1950s. He believed that the Bedouin way of life was the basis for Arabic culture, and therefore felt it crucial to document them before they vanish. Some 500 photographs from the research were donated to the Arab Image Foundation by his granddaughter, Norma Jabbour, whose voice also accompanies us in the film. Jabbour's images of traditional life in the desert are mixed with new footage that retraces Jabbour's desert trip. And midway through the film, we are also transported to 1982 during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon through Akram's own photographic documentations, of the hill in front of his house being bombed. as well as his diary entries that sometimes read like news reports and sometimes of everyday happenings, like about a film he watched or a new car the family bought or driving lessons. I want to show a short clip from the film. Let's see if I do this correctly.
بعد ظهر اليوم بدأت تسمع أصوات انفجارات عالية وأصوات راجمات صواريخ تبين أنها من جهة الضاحية الجنوبية. وكنت أحضر نفسي لحضور فيلم لا غير إي فيني في نادي السينما، ولكن الفيلم ألغي لأسباب أمنية. حاولت الذهاب إلى سينما مارينيان ظنا مني أنها تعرض شوت ذا مون، ولكنها كانت ما زالت تعرض ذا وول.
This is not the part I wanted to show, but I don't see the numbers here of the time. I see. Sorry. Here. Sorry. I'm skipping that.
عادت اليوم إلى أجواء العاصمة اللبنانية. 1 آب. ماني آب.
ألو.
حياتي.
I don't want to take up too much time showing film clips because otherwise we won't have time for questions. Sorry. There we go. Those images that Akram took in 1982 is a stark contrast to the images of the Bedouin desert from the 1950s shown earlier. Throughout the film here, there's a self-awareness about the handling of images and their context. Jabur's photos are shown in a book, as composites with the camera panning the landscape, as original prints, and as transparencies with archival numbers assigned to them. The same self-awareness is also applied to Akram's own presence in the film, with him flipping the pages, his voice when they are in the desert journey, as well as his own interventions with his documents that he took when he was a teenager. The photos are not used as documents to illustrate plain fact, but they are employed to tell a story, which we can say is about the critiquing of romanticized Orientalist views, social history of photography, or an investigation into documentary practices, including his own. This day could also be seen as an attempt to draw connections between disparate geographies and an examination of the movement of images and people in a historically divided, war-torn Middle East. These are some stills of Akram's documentations from 82 or the 80s. Included in this day are portraits of resistance fighters or young men posing to be as such, which you saw earlier in the clip. These photographs were made by the photographer Hashama Madani, who Akram has engaged in an ongoing work since they met in 1999. Madani had a studio in Saida, Akram's hometown, and portraited most people that in the village, from studio shots to their promenades to basically in front of their shops, etc. I wanted to mention Madani here because it kind of represents Akram's collecting in the most expansive sense, not limited to just photographic material, but rather a look at the social and economic context of a photographer operating in a small town. The collection of Madani is one of the largest, if not the largest collection in the Arab Image Foundation. And basically, I wanted to make a small excerpt here because we do have Madani's work and Akram's work representing his investigations in Madani's studio and his practice in the exhibition with an expanded film entitled 28 Nights and a Poem. And also some photographic series of men crossing one of the newest bridges at the time in Saida. And this is a triptych of Madani's reception space in his studio, which is also exhibited in the show. Another work I'd like to highlight here, not so much about a collection in a way, but what constitutes a collection and if it can only consist of one item. This is a project entitled In This House from 2005. It's a film, and I reference it to talk about process and how it can become more significant than obtaining the object itself, in which the collection is not related necessarily to physical material. I want to show a small clip here. Let's see if I do a better job this time. I wanted to show several clips. 7:30. I can't see what I'm...
In 1991, after the Taif Agreement, all militias were requested to submit their ammunition to the Lebanese army and clear their bases. Consequently, Ali and his comrades had to withdraw from Ain el-Mir. On this day, Ali wrote a letter to the owners of the house, where he spent 6 years. He dug in the garden and buried it inside an empty case of a B-10 82mm mortar. When I asked Ali about the letter, he said it was supposed to be still buried in the garden, 2 steps away from the right front corner of the house. He confirmed that the owners returned home and built a 5-story building in their backyard. Ali drew directions for me indicating how to identify the house once I was in Ain el-Mir. On October 12, 2002, I headed to Ain el-Mir to meet this family. It It was relatively easy to locate the house given the precision of Ali's references. After knocking at the door, I introduced myself as a documentary filmmaker working on the subject of the war in this region. I was welcomed by Sherbil and his wife, parents of 6 children.
لا عن الزاوية بس بمحاذاة هذا هذا تبقى ما برك محاذاة مثلا هيك لا هيك مثلا لا هو في السيرفي مسمي بسمي اياها خريطة مثلا بركي مثلا في ضل هيك مثلا لا هو اكيد مش بعرف مثلا بهالاتجاه هيك طب هلا تلفن له بقول له صبيحة عم يقول له خلينا ما نعرف شو انا شو بدي كلنا قول له يا زال شو هذا زال جالس خلص هي كل المنطقة لك جرب هون جرب هون بالضبط ما تبحث على الفاضي قديش هو حاطه متر ونص متر ما بيبحث على الفاضي يتلفن له ويطلع هيك لنا متر بيحلل هنا من هنا من هون فشخه ونص مش متر ونص متر ونص بده فشخه هذه فشخه طيب صار بعدين نص متر قول يلا طيب النصين ل 40 هي عندك يعني المفروض يكون عندك لا هي متر ونص يعني لهون زي هيك يعني يا عند الراف الشحان يا عند
Oops. Let's see. So at the end of the film, they eventually find this letter. Oops, I'm pressing the wrong thing. Sorry. There we go. But basically, this act of digging, the search, generated situations for encounters, not only with people, but also of newfound documents, such as the ones you saw on the split screen on the left, right, earlier. So this work really encompasses the archaeological framework in which Akram has operated, about digging up information, in this case literally, from the past, and resituating them in the contemporary to bring new histories to surface. Before I skip to the next slide, I just want to briefly mention a beautiful book and project that Akram did entitled Earth of Endless Secrets, which is a compilation of his documents that he has collected over his life, in a way, including documents that he encountered while working on his video works. It was, in a way, an open-ended project that acknowledged this archaeological thinking in his practice about uncovering and collecting, and how and these documents that are related to the conditions of a post-war Lebanon. So in a way, the earth is considered an archive, the ultimate archive, as Akram would say. This is a film still from a 2010 work entitled On Photography, People and Modern Times, which is on view in the exhibition. It's based on interviews that he made in 1998 to 2000 while researching and acquiring collections for the Arab Image Foundation. The film shows the two lives of a photograph, once in the hands of its owners or the photographers, or basically those who lived the photograph moment, and again in the hands of archivists in the Arab Image Foundation. The film infuses, for me, a sense of emotional belonging and non-belonging of the photographs, and can be read as a critique of collecting practices that displaces photographs from their original context. And here is Akram has, as he mentioned in his talk yesterday, his views about collecting has shifted since he began researching and collecting for the Arab Image Foundation in the first years, to thinking about what preservation means, whether it's about materiality or also about emotion. And if it's emotion we're talking about, perhaps it has more value in the original context. 7 years later, Akram made another film, which is on view here and premiered in the context of this exhibition as a follow-up film entitled On Photography, Dispossession, and Times of Struggle, which looks at people's stories during war and how they were dispossessed of things, how things got lost or taken away along the way of fleeing from war. And again, it's a subtle critique of the Arab Image Foundation also doing the same. Jumping in between the two films, between the two on photography films, is a project that he did for Documenta 13 in 2012, entitled Time Capsule. This project is a continuation, taking a different form, of the critique of collecting and the problematics involved in record keeping, particularly with photographic collections. Akram considers this project as a script for action, an antithesis to collecting, about concealing or returning. It was inspired by the real story of the National Museum in Beirut during the Civil War, where the director of the museum had ordered the archaeological collection to be protected in reinforced concrete blocks so that they would be protected, because the area where the museum was a target during the war. And there were fighters in the museum without knowing that there were treasures hidden behind the walls or seemingly columns at the time. And it wasn't until the end of the war in 1991 that they unearthed these treasures. So metaphorically, it was like reversing an archaeological dig and returning the objects to the earth as an act of radical preservation. And again, applying this act of radical preservation to the Arab Image Foundation would mean returning the original items back to their owners, and thereby generating also new encounters with people and possibly new documents and images. Heading towards the end. And now I'm going to jump to the age of big data and social media. As normal, as we all do, Akram also uses the internet as an arena for study and collecting. And here I want to show a clip, because this is a kind of a radical jump in a way. This is a work from 2011. I'm going to jump around here so you get the idea.
www.6rb.com.
قلبي معذب في هواك يا زين وانت دوم ناسيني ناسي هواك زين وانت دوم نسيني ناسي هواي الله معاي أسألك بالله لدوم جفيني أنا اللي جنيت على حالي وبقيت وحيد شوف غيري باع قلبه.
Okay, so you get the idea. So the work is a 4-channel installation, as you saw, compiled of video self-portraits posted on YouTube by young men throughout the Arab world, in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Yemen, and Libya. These videos bring us into a terrain that is at once intimate, but also self-consciously very public, revealing social and material desires and how one wants to be perceived, just as the way we use social media. We see young men pretending to be superheroes, working out, posing, performing fancy tricks on motorcycles or cars, and dancing with friends. What is largely missing from these videos is the presence of women, which is a subtle reminder that social media is public space, which is very much dictated by men in the Arab world, whether physical or virtual. I'm finishing. To sum up, Akram's work can be said to be based on an expanded form of collecting practices that is less about ownership and obsession, but about study and writing histories from the present. He is interested in individual histories, the ordinary within the extraordinary, which at times may be the history of a single object. And lastly, and totally unconnected, but it's a reflection about the museum as a collecting entity and what the responsibilities and the functions of a museum should be as such. If we see collecting as a way of writing history, then I think in a way it's the museum's role to constantly revise this history and not see it as a stagnant, hegemonic frame. That's it. Thank you very much. We're fortunate enough to have Akram with us this evening. So if you have any questions, or if Akram wants to make any comments or say what you said is not true, please feel free. Thank you. Then we can have a drink upstairs.
I would like, before we have a drink, very much like to thank you very much, Hiuwai. And I think it's also, I have had the chance to now work with you and MACBA, which is a great museum. And I think that museums like MACBA in Barcelona, they are really extending in that way, and they are really developing. And I hope it's also our wish to do so. And I hope, and we will continue our cooperation in a way, and thank you for giving us such good examples also on earlier works on Akram. It's a kind of a compliment, compliments what we did yesterday, or what I tried yesterday in our talk to speak about the artistic practices and then how this is all merging. But maybe some of you wants to ask a question or make a comment on what we have seen.
Yeah.
I'd just like to know whether you knew Akram before as an artist, or it came really by looking for archives and then you got to know his work, or did you know him before?
I knew his work before, but I didn't know him personally.
Okay.
And as I said, we found out about the Arab Image Foundation. I forgot through whom, but Bartolomeo had already started going and investigating, I think, as early as 2012. And then he brought me into the project, and it was like being involved in. I don't want to sound mean, but like a dysfunctional family. It was the more we got into it, the more we realized how complex the organization was and the impossibility of telling the story through us, which is why for us it really made sense that as the Arab Image Foundation was an artist initiative, it only made sense that this reflection on the 20-year history is also an artistic project in the end. I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. I am interested in continuities, and I'm just wondering, beyond Akram, do you have younger artists who are following this very radical approach to photography?
I would say, I mean, there are, for example, members of the Arab Image Foundation who are working very radically, not only with photography, but with the concept of the archive. Yasmin El-Sabah is an artist who comes to mind. She's one of the younger members, an artist of the foundation, and who had been working in a refugee camp in Lebanon, a Palestinian refugee camp, for many years, living with the people there and documenting their photographs, not collecting, but rather taking them, scanning them, and creating her own archive, but using them only in the context of her almost ephemeral performative works. Let's say it's a collection within the Arab Image Foundation without physically being present, because the images are not made available to the public, only in the form of her presentations. So it's another way of thinking about this archive, which had evolved over the years that she's been working with the refugees. But it's ephemeral archive, only activated by her. And of course, the question is, what will happen when she is not around? And this is a challenge, of course, that she constantly struggles to think about as well.
Thank you. I very much like the fact that you consider collections not being a process of possessing a work of art, but it's also about the interactions. I'm wondering if that includes also the episode of dismissing some of the objects that result from a particular interaction with some actors.
I don't know, maybe Akram, you want to take that one?
Yes, if there is some kind of a selection process when collecting this work of, object of art, if you include everything you encounter in your collection, or if you have some criteria not to do that.
I want to draw a distinction between collecting for an art institution where you acquire, actually, which is acquisition, where you acquire something because of its quality, because you want to build a collection of significant works, and collecting data and information and research material and photographic elements for the sake of studying them, such as in the case of the Arab Image Foundation. And in this case, it's important to highlight that the foundation does not acquire, we don't pay money for getting these collections, but we rely on artists' interest to generate material in oral history, textual, that accompany photographs that they think are important or worth keeping. One, maybe in their own work. Two, that they think they should be available to the public. So in that, from that perspective, of course, every process of collecting has to dismiss other things that the subjectivity of the person doing the research doesn't consider pertinent for the development of that research. Yeah, did I answer you? Yeah, great.
Someone else?
Thank you.
Thank you, Hiuwai. Thank you very much.